just simply raise your hand and we might be able to pick you up from that point. The format will be that we will take the reports. I'll then hand over in the usual way to Ian Martin as the investment director for any further comments that he may wish to add. And then I'll open it up for comments, questions from that point on. And then, of course, we'll go through the recommendations and seek approval. On the basis, if anyone does not say yes, I will assume that you all do. So it's by exception. If you don't agree, we need to be told, and Carl will organise that accordingly. So, Carl, are you okay with all of that?
Yes, Chair, thank you.
The only other thing is, if you're not speaking, perhaps you'd hold on mute. We do get quite a bit of feedback on these systems, so I think that would be helpful for everyone. Morning, Matt. I can see quite a few people on the screen. Okay, then I'll proceed accordingly. Apologies for absence, Carl. Any apologies?
No apologies from any members, Chair. Just a couple of apologies from a couple of officers, Andy Williams and Richard Moon from Coventry City.
Okay. Any declarations of interest from anyone which have to be notified to Carl now? Or if something comes up in a report, you can obviously add a conflict of interest. Any conflicts of interest you've been advised of, Carl?
None that I'm aware of, Chair.
Okay. Okay, the first substantive item is at item 3. There's the minutes of the previous meeting on the 15th of June. I'm just taking those as a true record. Anyone wish to have any amendments made before we agree those? I can't see anyone indicating, Carl, so I'm putting those as a true record.
Thank you, Chair.
We therefore move on to item 4 on the agenda, which is investment programme update and dashboard. I've got Linda Horn or Ian Martin's name against this, so whichever one of you you can present accordingly. Thanks.
I'm happy to talk through that, Chair. So funding commitments as of end of June are 770.4 million. That's against our approved ceiling of 801. The costs incurred or our drawings, if you prefer, to 31st of May were 176.5 million. That's an increase of 19.3 million since end of March. So the actual drawings as projects progress are ramping up. Our devolution deal gateway process has begun, so we've got an update on that from Andy Morgan later in this session. We note in there that we've started a process for the future methodology for progressing schemes, which is all subject to leaders' approval, so it's kind of a work in progress at the moment. We're hoping to conclude that during July, early August. The IP dashboard presented as Appendix 5 records 57 projects with approved funding. That doesn't break out at the moment the various sub-projects which we agreed at last investment board. Going forward, sub-projects, those individual projects, would be separated out as they come forward with future business cases. There are 6 schemes showing a red status, but there's no change on these. HS2 parallel designs, we are requesting a change request on that and expecting one to come forward to extend the timeline. As you'll recall, board agreed last time to continue spending in the meantime on that item. Coventry City Centre South, the completion is expected to be a little bit later than was originally forecast in the business case. We are expecting a further presentation on that middle of the year, so due soon as to progress when the planning application goes in. The A46 Link Road has not spent any money yet. It's awaiting DFT funding, and the criteria of the business case is that is only drawn when the DFT funding is available to be drawn as well. That's the reason behind that. And then there's 3 sprint projects, which are only at design stages. They're small sums of money, and it's the actual end date of the projects rather than the design work that is likely to be a few months later than originally scheduled. So no cause for concern. That's it, Chair, unless there's any questions.
Okay, any questions or comments at this point in time to Ian as director? Indicate accordingly. Nothing on the chat either. So I think we'll move to the recommendations. We're noting 3 elements: the status of the investment programme delivery is detailed within the report. We note the progress of the devolution deal 5-year gateway review, and we note the investment programme funding status. I'm assuming everyone supports those. No dissent. Thank you. That's fine. We now move on to the first presentation, the SQW update. Is Andy Morgan presenting that, just for my information? Is that correct?
Yes, Chair, as far as I'm aware.
Andy, are you here?
I am here, Chair. Yeah.
So can you present the update accordingly, please? Thank
Sure.
you.
I'll just try and share the presentation on the screen. Can you see that now?
No.
I can't see it, Andy. I think the papers have been issued though, so most people will have had them, but
Okay.
it's not come up on my screen.
Okay, I'll just talk through the update then, Chair, if that's okay. So the context behind this is the SQW evaluation. SQW have been commissioned to inform the central government 5-year gateway review. So the SQW have been asked to evaluate the investment programme. So the progress to date, SQW completed the baselining stage, which was running from March 2020 to June 2020. So for all of the programmes and projects that were in scope, they completed a baselining exercise in terms of the financials and the outputs and the outcomes. They then went on to do a series of what they called strategic consultations, which were very across a cohort of senior stakeholders from within the region that would be aware of the economical picture from when the WMCA formed and went live to current day. SQW also completed a series of surveys with the project leads and did some consultations there. And then the output from that was what they called their 1-year out report. So this was a little late in being issued, but there was a 1-year out report that they produced that I issued internally to a series of internal stakeholders. The next steps now are fairly key. So there is the final data return, which involves the programme and project outputs, outcomes, and then the financial projections and the actual spend to date. There is some contextual economic forecasting that will be completed, which looks at the headline economic trends before and at the time interventions were selected, indicating how the economy was expected to deliver within the West Midlands during the period. There is a second wave of strategic and project consultations that will be completed. Same concept as the first set of strategic consultations, but a different and much larger group of strategic consultees. They will also complete a case study, which is a bit more of a deeper dive on one of the projects. And what they do then is they produce, SQW produce a draft final report that is issued in September, and that will be circulated internally and allows WMCA to respond to that report with a view to the final report being completed in October 2020, which then goes off to central government. One of the things that I will be instigating, which some of the other combined authorities have done, is a document that's completed by the WMCAs, which is optional, but it's called a complementary report. And that opportunity for WMCA to provide its own set of information and responses to central government to support the evaluation and the overall 5-year gateway review. That's the update, Chair, if anybody's got any questions at all.
Okay, on the chat bar, we've got Councillor Ball's made the point he couldn't see it. I mean, that's exactly right. None of us actually could. So we need to get the screen cleared of this item now and put back into putting the participants up. But it was issued with the papers. The important point is we have to pass the 5-year gateway review to be able to continue to get devolution funding. That's the arrangement. So the SQW work supports the 5-year gateway review that we currently have. Am I on mute?
No.
No.
Okay, so that's what this is all about. As I said, the SQ report will be issued around September, but it'll be subject to review by the WMCA to put back to SQW and the findings. This board will be alerted to any issues that come out of the SQW review. I'm going to pass over to Ian Martin just to add anything to that point. Ian, do you need to add anything?
No, thanks, Chair. At the moment, we're not aware of any issues arising. The process is continuing well, and SQW obviously report to HCLG, so Strategic Hub are liaising with them on a regular basis.
Okay, any questions or comments to Andy or to Ian at this point in time? If you do,
from Councillor Grinsell, Chair.
Councillor Grinsell.
I was just going to ask, just put it in the chat. You mentioned the deep dive project, so I can't tell which is the deep dive project. Is there one single project that there'll be a deep dive on? Is that what you're saying?
Andy.
Yeah, so we're still identifying what's the appropriate project to do that deeper dive in. So there's a set of principles, and against a set of principles, I just want to do a bit of internal engagement first, and then we'll identify what that project's going to be.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Karen.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. So any other further points, clarifications required? It's just for noting at this point in time.
Nick Abel, Chair.
Nick Abel, please. You're on mute, Nick.
Sorry, I do apologise. Who selects the projects that are identified, and also who selects the deep dive project? Is it us or is it SQW?
Andy?
So the initial set of questions were derived from predetermined criteria that was agreed. So it was intended to be impact evaluations. So there was an assumption that projects would have physically completed works, but that's not the case. So it was changed to where there'd be what was deemed a significant spend, where there would be delivery of some outputs or outcomes that could be evaluated. In terms of the deeper dive project, again, SQW have identified a set of principles that they wanted to deeper dive against, and that's at the minute within WMCA's gift to identify the project. So that's where I'd like to do a bit more internal engagement to help inform what that project is.
Thanks.
Okay, any further? No, so this is simply for noting at this point in time.
Tony Jefferson, Chair.
Sorry, Tony. Go through.
Thanks, Bob. Just looking at the chart, there is a dramatic increase in the steepness of the slope in the forecasts compared to the actuals. One of the questions I'd have looking at that is how confident are we can hit the forecasts given performance to date?
Andy?
I think I could probably pick that up.
I think you should pick that up, Ian. Yeah, it's probably not
we're starting to stray from SQW into kind of how are the projects doing territory. I think as I read out earlier, we are starting to see quite heavy draws on the projects as they progress. Sort of in construction terms, if you looked at it, you always referred to this S curve that projects are slow at the start and then they ramp up. Obviously, we've got a lot of projects, so kind of that should smooth the S curve, but there is one, and I think it's a good question in effect, Tony, because I think everybody's rather optimistic, aren't they, about the progress that their projects are going to make, and it is generally your actuals run slightly below a forecast. In many ways, because we don't fund through a big pot of money that we hold, we kind of we get the money every year. We have to make drawings. Kind of the slower against actuals, probably the better in some ways. And of course, in the finance team, they're very carefully managing that. Their ideal, obviously, is to have perfect forecasts, but unfortunately, they never are.
Tony, you okay with that?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Interesting response.
Okay.
We work hard with the accountable bodies to make sure these forecasts are as perfect as possible.
All right, just for noting at this stage, so I'm going to move on to the next item. Sorry, Bob. Was there somebody else?
Bob, Councillor Boyle.
My apologies.
Morning, sorry. Just a quick question. This deep dive, when is the date, or when are you proposing to announce or make the decision as to when and what this deep dive project will be? Is there a time frame?
Yeah, so that will be in the next week or two.
Jim?
Right. Yeah, so as I say, what will inform that? I just need to do some internal engagement as to in terms of the project that we can take through to make sure it's appropriate. So if it's appropriate that I provide an update, perhaps through Ian at the next meeting, I can do that if you'd like.
Yeah, we'll do that. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. All right. We'll move on. It is just for noting. We now have a further presentation on VLR. Is Colin Knight with us, Carl?
Yes, I am.
Okay, Colin, over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Chair. I'll just sort the presentation out.
Everyone should have had the papers, by the way, Colin.
Okay. So hopefully that's sharing, is it?
It is.
Right. Thank you. Okay. Thanks, Chair. So this is more really to bring you up to speed where we're at with the Very Light Rail project, but I'll start with a little bit of a sort of just going through very quickly over some of the background. Because, obviously we've been here before, presented to Investment Board, but as you'll know, this is about creating an affordable tram system, for cities the sort of size of Coventry, of which there are many across the UK and indeed across the world. It's also about creating a local manufacturing sector as well. So this is putting the West Midlands at the centre of excellence in very light rail design and manufacture. It's about being part of an integrated transport system. We're not looking to replace other modes of transport. We're looking, to provide an a much more attractive alternative to the car than perhaps has been provided hitherto. And I don't really need to remind you all as to why that's necessary. Transport's now responsible for 1/3 of carbon, and that's staying stubbornly high. So clearly to address the climate change challenge, this is going to be important. And from a clean air point of view, nitrogen dioxide. Clearly, a number of us are under the cosh from the minister to reduce NO2. And if you look at the NO2 during lockdown, you can see that these are a couple of examples from Coventry. The need to, reduce private mileage is absolutely critical, and that illustrates it. And particulates, the small particles that come from tyre wear, road surface wear, brake linings. Again, all of these things that need to be addressed. And light rail, trams, have got proven pulling power. It's that sign of permanent investment, the rails in the road. Unlike a bus, which could be deregistered within 70 days, we all know about the success stories. So the question obviously is, why aren't there more of them? And of course, the answer is cost. If you're looking up to £50 million a kilometre in suburban locations, double that in city centre locations, then, it's absolutely clear that cities the size of Coventry, are never going to be able to sort of justify those sorts of business cases. And we've calculated that we need to target somewhere near £10 million a kilometre. That's the kind of holy grail. And from my experience, I worked on Midland Metro in the 1980s, and this has kind of been the sweet spot in the market that people have been trying to target since then. But I think we've been extremely fortunate in the sense that there's been a great coalescence of opportunity here in the West Midlands, not least through the work that Warren Manufacturing Group have been doing, very successfully lightweighting in the automotive sector. And our challenge simply was to WMG, could you build a lightweight tram car, street tramway? Because if you could do that, we could then design a lightweight track form, which would massively reduce the cost, because of course a lot of the cost does go into the track. So we've been very fortunate in pulling together quite a formidable array of partners. Fortunate as well in that with the development of the National Innovation Centre in Dudley, which is looking to specialise in very light rail. This has given us a fantastic opportunity to find a solution to this problem of an affordable tram. And here we have the prototype vehicle, which is now being built. As you'll be aware, we have had funding through the Combined Authority, 12.2 million, added to which the Cov Warwick's LEP 2.46. So that's given us a budget by which we've been able to get off to a great start on this project. So as I say, this is the vehicle which is now being built. It's a vehicle which, as you may recall, it'd be battery powered, so there's no overhead wiring. It's designed to run on tight geometry, so it can take 15-metre radii without squealing or making a noise. It can carry up to about 56 people. Although at the moment we're having driving positions at both ends, but the aim is ultimately to want to go fully autonomous. And that's really important because not only will it create more space inside the vehicle, but full autonomy would also allow these vehicles to operate at very high frequency. And that's going to be one of the things that's going to really attract people out of the cars to use this system. And autonomy would reduce the cost of operation massively. And crucially, designed and built in the UK, ideally here in the West Midlands. But that's one of the key things about this project, is creating this local manufacturing sector. The vehicle would also be operable on Midland Metro tracks as well. I think that's an important point to make, as I say, because integration's key. So here you can see some of the vehicle parts that are already been built. The bogey's already been built, and that's one of the clever bits of the system because, as I say, that's what's going to allow it to go around the corners. And crucially, this thing's going to be lightweight. We are targeting fully laden between 3 and 4 tons per axle, as opposed to 10 tons for a conventional tram. And it's that lightweighting that's going to enable us to design a very lightweight track form. We have now been through an exhaustive 3-stage procurement process to procure a partner to build the track. Sorry, to design the track, I should have said. That's a French company called Ingrop, but I might add that, the aim is that this, again, the track form would be manufactured here in the Midlands. The reason we've gone with Ingrop is because of their extensive experience overseas in terms of reducing the cost of light rail systems, but they believe we can go further, and through the procurement process they've come up with some great innovative ideas. One of the things we're looking at is low carbon, so we're looking to minimise the use of concrete, But crucially, and this cross section shows you the sort of the theory, we're aiming at getting the track to sit in the top 300 millimetres of the road. And that's crucial because the shallowest utilities sit at about 450 mil. So this potentially enables the utilities to stay put. And we've engaged extensively with Streetworks UK and the individual utilities, and I'll explain in a minute how we're going to partner with them in developing the track form. We've developed a 64-page set of criteria and the things that the track needs to address. And we've already had a series of workshops with INGROP. So we're getting some real expert input into this, external as well as highways input. And, you know, work is now well underway on starting to develop this novel track form. So, as I say, that is going to be absolutely critical. And then it's about bringing the vehicle and the track together for testing at Dudley. Now, the vehicle, as I said, is being assembled. It's being assembled at NP Aerospace in Coventry, and that should be ready by the end of this year. At Dudley, in parallel, the first test track, what we call test track 1's being laid, and that is a 2-kilometre section of railway on the former South Staffordshire line running under Dudley through Dudley Tunnel. And that will be used to test our vehicle for sort of speed, endurance, braking, etc. So from February next year, the prototype vehicle will be tested on test track 1 at Dudley, at the Innovation Centre. Now, later next year, we hope to conclude the development of the novel track form that I just talked about. That will then form test track 2. And test track 2 is shown here in red on this plan, and that will be to test the prototype vehicle on the new track form, because clearly we have to assess how the two are going to run together. Now, this will incorporate a number of novel features. One of them is a hydraulic ram, which will replicate HGV loadings, because whilst I've talked about the trams being relatively lightweight, if they're in the highway, clearly they're still going to be subject to lorries and other heavy traffic. So what we want to do is to sort of replicate those movements, and that's how this will be done mechanically here at Dudley. Secondly, we'll build a section of what we call test road, and that test road will incorporate dummy utilities, and it'll be here that we'll work with the utility organisations on the track form, how best to lift it in and out, and to ensure that they have the confidence that where appropriate they leave their utilities there. We're not going to be stupid about this. I mean, if there's an old cast iron gas main or something, clearly we want to shift that out of the way. But the majority of utilities, we believe, can be successfully left and, you know, accessed as and when necessary. And that's really one of the big important points about this innovation that we'll be doing jointly with them at Dudley. So, as I said earlier, it's all about the cost. And so here we've had independent cost consultants look at the work we've done so far to provide an assessment of where we're at in terms of looking at the cost of conventional light rail, which is in the sort of the dark blue there, and the very light rail, which is in the fainter sort of blue colour. And you'll see that, you know, there's some very significant differences. I'm not going to talk through it, but just so you can get a sort of a snapshot really of where we're at in our target of trying to reduce costs by 20%. But I can't emphasise enough how important this is. If we're going to get an affordable tram system, you know, which has great applicability across Coventry, a lot of the West Midlands, you know, it'll enable you to get a lot more sort of route mileage for your buck, you know, where the demand doesn't exist for the heavier option. So in Coventry, just to give you a quick flavour of what we're up to there, here's the network that we're looking at in Coventry. The first route we're looking at is railway station to the hospital in the northeast of the city. We're looking at this kind of cloverleaf. And the reason we're looking at a cloverleaf is because only 16% of trips in the morning peak, for example, are to the city centre. Most trips in the city are to places, to and from places other than the city centre. So this is about looking at how you join the dots really about the major trip attractors and generators around the city. And this sort of pattern with two-way trams operating on each of those legs at high frequency offers the best opportunity for providing that connectivity and again, getting people out of the cars. Coupled with a strategic link to the HS2 Birmingham interchange station over at Solihull, and of course links to strategic park and ride sites on the edge of the city. And we're certainly talking to Midlands Connect as well about how that sort of links into a regional strategy. And in terms of affordability, we've done extensive work on looking at the potential for joint ventures, and huge interest. There was about 30 different organisations came to our sort of open day to talk about how a joint venture might work. But the critical point is that we have to get to proof of concept first. That was unequivocal. So in terms of us being able to push forward, looking at greater commerciality, we're absolutely essential that we get to the proof of concept. So in terms of time frame, I've talked about the research and development. So a lot of testing to take place throughout 21 with the vehicle, 2022 to test the vehicle and the track form. So the aim is that by the end of 2022 we have that proof of concept. In 22 to 24 we'll be working on getting the Transport and Works Act order, and preliminary work has already started on that. So I mentioned the station to the hospital as the first route. We're already out there doing surveys of utilities to identify the best route. We're also challenging DfT, by the way, about the labyrinthine thing that's known as the Transport and Works Act order. It's a ridiculous bit of legislation. As part of developing 21st century infrastructure, we need to get some 21st century processes to augment that. And then finally, we'd be looking at the first route being operable by 2025. I say the first route, the first section of the first route. Very quickly, this isn't just going to stand still. If we're going to make the West Midlands, a hotbed of design and manufacture of very light rail, ongoing innovation is essential. So autonomy, I've already talked about, essential to enable higher frequencies, and we're bidding to Innovate UK for money to do some work on developing the autonomy in parallel to the other work that's currently taking place. What about COVID? COVID has, obviously made public transport less attractive, and government advice up until now has been to avoid public transport. So we're looking at a series of innovations that might actually help, reduce the impact of any viral infection by looking at how you improve ventilation, for example, the use of copper-based materials, which is poisonous to COVID-19. Maybe that's what we need to use for the grab rails, use of contactless technology, automated cleaners. All of those things are things that we're looking at pioneering as part of this project to try and make the vehicle sort of future proof. And finally, dynamic wireless power transfer, charging on the move. If we're bidding for money to do trials on that. We've got partners like Toyota on board bidding for money. We want to be able to show that if you can charge on the move, you would then be able to reduce the weight of the batteries and extend the range, all of which would improve the operational efficiency. But as I said, this is part of an integrated system, so linking in with other great innovations going on in the area, for instance, autonomous pods, connected autonomous vehicles, electric scooters, electric taxis and so forth. It's all about how do these integrate using mobility as a service and the expanding 5G network. A lot of stuff, again, which is being trialled and pioneered here in the West Midlands. So it's a very exciting opportunity, to create future cities which can be attractive places to live and work, bringing together all of those features. And crucially, as I say, to make the West Midlands, the epicentre of design and manufacture of very light rail. So thank you for listening.
Thank you for that, Colin. On the chat, one comment from Matt Hammer. I've got feedback somewhere. Can somebody turn them on? Which is a question I think relates to the points I was going to make. You mentioned the Transport Works Act and the complexity of that. And the question therefore is, you put up the anticipated programme, but if you are constrained by the Transport Works Act procedures, how will that impact on that particular programme? And I think Matt Hammond makes a similar point, that it is how this project can actually be delivered and the timescale for doing so. And he draws on personal experience. So can you just come back on that one, please, Colin? If you're constrained by the Transport Works Act, how will it impact on the programme?
Oh, okay, Chair. So that timetable that we've put forward has been based on what we think can be achieved through the current process. So we've allowed 3 years to go through the Transport and Works Act programme. So although I've shown it as 22 to 24, as I said, a lot of the preliminary work, the design work, will take place prior to that. And that's why we've started the utility surveys. So whilst it's impossible to absolutely guarantee that we're going to go through, we're going to get it done in that time, the idea is that we, 3 years should be a good sort of working assumption in terms of being able to get the Transport and Works Act powers. Given that a lot of this as well, the vast majority of this is going to be within existing highway. So, it's not that we're looking to acquire large areas of land or any issues like that. As I say, we are working largely within the confines of the highway or within council-owned property. So that, again, should reduce the complexities and should reduce some of the complexities, the environmental impacts, for example.
Matt Hammond, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the presentation is a good deck, and it picks up most of the points. I think the key issue is that we need to pick up from, for example, the West Midlands experience in Birmingham and others around the country. We could look at Sheffield and many others. And what can be done to genuinely accelerate this through? That for me is the key point. That it doesn't serve for going into a detailed conversation right now, but I do think there is plenty of expertise that we could draw on to try and make sure that project is accelerated. Thank you, Chair.
Tony Jefferson, do you want to add your comment, which you put on the screen for me anyway?
No, Bob. I think the comment I put on the screen says it all.
Okay. Any other points of clarification from anybody? Actually, this presentation was requested some time ago by Councillor Bird. I know he wanted to get an update on where all of this stood, and I think it's helpful to have done so. And of course, we did approve a change request in February at the February meeting of the Investment Board with regard to VLR, and subsequently a request has gone into government with regard to the Innovation Centre in Dudley from last week. So we are awaiting the outcome of that. Carl, have you picked up any other questions? No, not indicated. Anyone else?
Sorry.
So I did have my hand up. Sorry.
I'm afraid I didn't see you.
Tristan's had his hand up a long time, and me, Bob.
Okay, I'll take Councillor Bird first, and then Tristan.
No, Tristan was first, Bob, if you don't mind.
Okay, the other way around, then I'll take Tristan first, and then Councillor Bird.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick questions. One of them was just about the technology, the batteries. That's all. I know that we've had in Birmingham, we've had some challenges where we've had to use the batteries to get up into Victoria Square, and I just wanted to sort of get a little bit more detail about what battery technology was actually being used and sort of what testing that battery technology has had. The other question was really just a general one about whether this is, how innovative this is in terms of what other countries are doing, what other companies are doing. I'm just a bit surprised that it feels like we're so far ahead, and I'm just a bit surprised given there's been a lot of experimentation in this kind of sector for a long time, and I'm just a bit surprised if we really are so far ahead of the rest of the world on it. And the last point I just say is but whether it's applicable to new developments. So I know this project, particularly talking about Coventry, is linking up existing areas, but we've had quite a few challenges in terms of developments, in terms of getting transport infrastructure into new developments. And I'm thinking of things like the Big Arden Cross project, even stuff like the Sustainable Urban Extension at Sutton Coldfield in Birmingham, and whether this kind of technology might be applicable there, where you're building from scratch rather than trying to lay it over the top of existing infrastructure.
Colin, do you want to answer that? And I'll go to Councillor Bird.
Yeah, so in terms of the battery technology, it is a sort of it's a proven, at the moment we're using batteries that are proven, which is a lithium titanate. So it's a lithium chemical battery. So nothing particularly innovative in the batteries themselves. The idea is clearly that would be, again, another aspect of the project that would be worked on going forward. The dream for me, as I think I indicated, would be charging on the move. I think that's a very realistic prospect going forward. There's quite a bit of experimentation being done. As I say, we're bidding for to do a trial in Coventry on that. And I think it would work really well with Very Light Rail and would reduce the reliance on the batteries. And if you can reduce the weight of the batteries in the vehicle, actually that's a huge step forward. In terms of development, we are working closely with developers. We have a couple of sustainable urban extensions within Coventry, and there's one just over the boundary in Warwickshire. So we're working with the developers there to make sure that we reserve corridors through those sites to make sure that you know, we do future-proof it. So whilst those corridors might be used for bus routes at the moment, so for example, up at Eastern Green, the corridor would initially be used by like the X1 service, for example. You know, clearly that corridor ultimately could be converted to operate for both buses and trams. So, you know, we're making sure that we do have those conversations with developers to make sure that we future-proof. And sorry, I think there was a third part, wasn't there? Have I missed a part?
Krista?
Yeah, it was about innovation elsewhere and just seeing how cutting edge this has been.
Sorry, yes, of course. So yes, I mean, we've done quite a lot of work looking at you know, what other people are doing going on overseas. And yes, I mean, there are other people looking in this space, of course there is. What we haven't found, and you know, because at the end of the day, we're a city council, you know, we're not in R&D for R&D's sake, but there is nothing that's quite the same as we've been targeting from what we can find, and we've certainly been doing some quite extensive research. The stuff that does look quite close, but actually when you dig into it, it's either not as far advanced you know, as one might think, or else, you know, it's not driving the cost in the same direction. And I think, and this has been vindicated for me by the amount of overseas interest that we've had. You know, we've had a number of towns and cities from not just within the UK, but also, you know, from overseas and abroad, looking to us to see what we're doing and looking at with interest. So whilst I, you know, as I say, I don't claim that we're doing something unique, other people are looking in this field. Certainly from our own research and from the expressions of interest that we've had from overseas, it really does seem, you know, that we are onto something here. And that's why we're so keen, you know, to make sure this keeps progressing and that we nail the West Midlands, as I said, as a centre of excellence in this field, you know, so we can create jobs locally. And that's really one of the key drivers behind this project. So whilst I do understand your question, as I say, we have not found anywhere that's doing quite the same thing.
Okay, Tristan, are you okay with that?
Yeah. Can we come and visit when it's all up and running and you've got your test centre up and running?
Yes. I'm going to go Councillor Bird. Councillor Bird, please.
Thanks, Bob. Well, a very interesting presentation, which is long awaited, I have to say. But I note from the presentation it carries 56 people, 20 seated, so I'm assuming the other 36 are standing up. Is that figure post-COVID or is it prior to COVID? The second thing is, it doesn't look very substantial. What's it going to do if you have a collision? It doesn't look very substantial to me. I know from the mere description, very light rail, that it's going to be light, and I understand that. And the third question, some years ago, and I mean some years ago, I went to see what's known as Parry's People Mover, which uses flywheel energy storage rather than technology of batteries. I just wondered whether, in actual fact, there's been any conversations with that company, which is a British company. I have to say, it was in its embryo stage in the late 80s, and we had to push it to start it. But I understand it's now been rolled out. It doesn't need any track at all, and it works on a flywheel system which stores energy with a rotor. I don't want to get too technical, but those are the three questions. One, the number of capacity. Two, the vehicle, whether in actual fact it will substantially stand up to a collision, and the thirdly, whether we've looked at flywheel storage technology.
Colin?
Okay, thank you. So in terms of vehicle capacity, you know, again, this is about sort of striking a balance between, you know, vehicle size, fitting into the streets, the weight of the vehicle, and frequency. So we felt, certainly for the sort of the Coventry sort of context, that this was the right size of vehicle for a whole number of reasons. As I mentioned earlier, if we could remove the driving positions, And I do agree, you know, that the sooner we can get autonomy, the better. Agree with the comment on that point. That will free up quite a lot more space inside the vehicle. The point about this is that we want to operate at high frequency because that's what's attractive to punters. So in actual fact, you know, if you can get many regular vehicles coming along, that's the way you can provide capacity. In the short term, it will be possible to run the vehicles not physically coupled, but virtually coupled. So you'll be aware of the work that's been done on connected or autonomous vehicles. It'll be possible to run, say, 2 vehicles in tandem using sort of virtual coupling. So those numbers, you said, were these pre-COVID? Yes, those numbers are based on pre-COVID. But that's why we think in terms of mitigation, I listed a number of pieces of research that we're doing. For instance, in terms of ventilation, air conditioning is seen as bad in terms of COVID. Natural ventilation, if we could find a way of lifting the air naturally vertically, that would make a massive difference in terms of the risk of spread. And it would also reduce weight. If you could get rid of the aircon unit, it reduced weight and cost. You know, happy days. So I think there's a number of things we could look at that would actually, you know, seriously mitigate. I also sincerely hope that by 2025, that, you know, we are all successfully vaccinated against COVID. But nonetheless, you know, as I say, we are looking at a number of pieces of research to address that. In terms of the lightweighting, yes, it does look light. And I think therein lies a success story, you know, that has been Jaguar Land Rover and others. And that's where that was really comes back to the origins of this piece of work, as far as I was concerned. Yes, you know, we talked to WMG and said, well, you've successfully reduced the weight of, you know, Range Rovers and stuff by hundreds of kilos, but was certainly not compromising the safety of those vehicles. And in actual fact, you know, they're safer than they ever were. So the whole point about this is that, you know, yes, it is lightweighting, but the vehicles will have to be fit for purpose. You know, the rules and regulations, vehicle construction and use regs won't allow us to run them in the public highway unless they are, you know, suitably tested. So I'm absolutely sure that in terms of, whilst they look lightweight, they will be robust and fit for purpose. Safety is absolutely paramount in all of this. And finally, Parry People Move, a really interesting point. I too, when I worked for Midland Metro in the 1980s, went to Cradley Heath, saw Mr. Parry, and I've sort of been in touch with him on and off ever since, frankly. I still talk to him now, very well aware of his technology. I think, without going into detail, you know, there's a number of issues. Yes, it's been operating successfully for a time on the Stourbridge branch line down to Stourbridge town. You know, yes, it does offer a reliable means of movement. It still needs energy to charge it. You know, there are a number of issues with ride quality and different features. And also, he's never ever looked at the whole issue of track. You know, we're looking here at designing a fully fledged integrated solution. And I think that is actually one of our unique selling points. I think, you know, and I perhaps should have answered this earlier as well. You know, we're not just looking at designing a clever vehicle. We're actually looking at designing, you know, the whole kit and caboodle here, so that it offers a full package, so that when we say we're targeting £10 million a kilometre, we mean it. You know, and this is looking at, you know, a complete package. And as I say, that's the thing that's going to hopefully, you know, be really attractive, not just to Coventry, but to many other towns and cities across the UK and further afield.
Okay, I've got Councillor O'Boyle, unless Councillor...
Sorry, Bob, I didn't get an answer to my first question. How many people will it carry is the nub of it. If the figures of 56 were prior to COVID, how many people will it carry with the current situation we have?
Okay, we'll take that one. Then I've got a Councillor O'Boyle.
Sorry, sorry, Chair, do you want me to answer that now?
If you don't, if you can, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, if we had to go for social distancing, then like all other forms of public transport, it's going to reduce that figure by roughly a third. You know, that would be, you know, we're not going to be any different under current rules. As I say, my take on it, as I explained, is that, you know, we're looking at ways of mitigating against that. But clearly, yeah, it's going to significantly reduce capacity, and the only way you can make the capacity up, as indeed the current operators are doing, is borrowing in more vehicles. And again, that just puts more and more pressure, I believe, on going for an autonomous solution, or indeed a remote driving solution as an interim, where one person can, say, drive 8 vehicles remotely. That might be another way around it. Running vehicles virtually coupled, they might be ways around actually trying to improve the carrying capacity if we had to invoke the current social distancing.
Okay, Councillor O'Boyle, thank you.
Thank you, Bob, and I hope colleagues appreciated the presentation. Just to make the obvious point, of course, that as Colin did say, you know, the first route won't be up and running until 2025. If we're still in COVID issues then, it won't be just a problem for this transport, it'll be a problem for all our transport, it'll be a problem for our economy. And in fact, we won't have an economy if we're still like this in 3 years' time. My other point just to make, this is the second or maybe third time that we presented Very Light Rail to the investment board since 2016, since I've been a member, and we've tried to keep people up to date and up to speed on it as much as we can, and we're happy to do that going forward at all times where we can. But just a couple of points to make, and I think they've been covered, but I just want to emphasise them again. The whole purpose and point about this, as Colin said, is about cost. Current trams, light trams, are just too expensive for towns like Coventry, towns like Leicester, perhaps towns like Bath or Bristol, those sort of towns and cities that have actually expressed an interest. We've spoken to them about this because you can actually make the business case add up. That's the first thing to say. The second thing, in terms of lightweighting, Colin's absolutely right. We've got Warwick Manufacturing Group as some of the experts in their field anywhere in the world who are working on this and are contracted to deliver this scheme, this project for us. And of course, working hand in glove with Jaguar Land Rover, who of course, again, in the automotive industry, are world leaders, both in strength and in lightweighting. And it's using that technology and bringing it to the field of very light rail. That's the innovation in itself, as well as the track form, which of course, where the money goes on current trams is actually just the cost of moving utilities. And the whole purpose and point of this lightweighting and the depth of the track depth means you don't have to move them and you can access the utilities at very short notice. And that saves you millions and millions of pounds going forward. And that is really the key point to make. The other thing about batteries, Colin gave a factually correct answer in terms of the batteries, but I just make the point, of course, you know, Coventry is the location for the UK Battery Industrialisation Centre. The whole purpose and point of that is to develop the batteries of the future that actually will be incorporated both into private vehicles, but potentially and also into public transport going forward. And again, that is a key point. And I keep saying this, and I know we'll come back to this time and time again. If we don't in the Midlands locate a gigafactory to start building the batteries that are going to be developed at the UK Battery Industrialisation Centre in the next couple of years, we will lose out to the Far East, to America, and even to Europe. And that is a real issue that needs to be taken up now. And actually making the point about wanting to sort of talk about forms of transport now that are going to use that sort of technology, i.e. here today, I think is really important to keep that narrative. And the final point to make is, and I hope colleagues take this one on board, we have got an awful lot of interest from the private sector involved in this. Now, I just asked the question, I've asked the question when I've spoke to them, why would they be interested in a scheme like this? It's because they see the potential here, and the reason why they see the potential is they think there's money to be made. But there's money to be made as the public sector, we should be investing in this to make sure we keep it within the public sector so we get something back. And 15% of the intellectual property rights that the Combined Authority have got, I can assure you, colleagues, you're going to get some back. You don't think you will, but I think you will. And the evidence we've got on today kind of proves that. So I hope it was useful. We're happy to bring it back in the future. We're cracking on with it now. The vehicle's being built as we speak. So it's already creating jobs, both in Coventry and in the West Midlands. So I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jim. That was very helpful. I mean, obviously, from the board's perspective, keeping us appraised of the developments, because it is an R&D programme at the moment, is very important. So I think that's really the continuing interest that the board will have going forward. But unless anyone else has indicated, I'm going to thank Colin for the presentation, which was very informative. and I'm sure that the board will want to see you again at some point in time in the future. But thanks very much for attending this morning.
I did have my hand up. Can I just say, this is the first presentation I've seen. I did have a sabbatical where the Labour Party were making a mess of Walsall. But, you know, people like me and Karen, I think, Karen, I speak for you, probably the first time you've seen this. And whilst I might have been a critic, and I have been, I'll put my hands up to that, Jim, now I've seen what I've seen, I'm a little more informed. And I think that's the problem. This was a very succinct presentation, and there are people on this call that have never seen it, Jim, and it is an exciting opportunity. I willingly support that. But, you know, sadly, as I say, it's the first time I've seen this, and all of the money that was going there, nobody has explained to me, and I see Karen nodding her head now, and some others on this call. So, you know, it is a great theory, and let's hope it works. But, you know, if I have been critical in the past, it's from ignorance rather than knowledge, and therefore this presentation, I hope, has helped me and others on this call.
Yeah, thank you for that. We have new members of the board. Some people won't have seen it, but anybody else wish to comment before I move on? And just on the issue of hand indication, I haven't seen your hand, Councillor Bird, honestly, so you're going to have to put it in front of your face, I'm afraid, for me to be able to see it. Carl, are there any other indications?
Councillor O'Boyle's got his hand up, but that might be an old hand.
Is it a new hand, Jim, or an old hand?
It was an old hand. I've took it down, but just the point to make that, you know, Mike's right. He hasn't seen it. I think I'm the longest serving member from the local authorities on this board, so I know we've done it. We'll present as and when we can, and when we're invited to do so, of course we will. And because I tell you what, I would have this on the agenda every investment board if you let me, but I bet you don't.
Might I suggest, Chairman, that we have this on a 6-monthly basis, because in 6 months this could advance quite dramatically, and as a result there are changes, who knows, with the forthcoming elections whenever they're going to be held, and people, Jim, need to know exactly what this is. So, I
guarantee you'll be here next time, though, Mike, if there are elections next year. But nevertheless, we're happy to bring it back quite regularly.
I'll be here. Don't worry, Jim. I'll be here. You can't get rid of it that easy. But instead of an old hand, it's a legacy hand, I'm told, Chairman.
Okay, Carl, we'll make a note of that and we'll look into that. And as things develop, it is important the board's kept appraised. So, again, thanks to Colin, thanks to Jim. Made your case well, Jim, and thanks for what you've done. Okay, I'm now going to move on to item 7. Item 7, 8, 9, and 10 are reports on our programmes. Nick, you're there on the line. Do you want to present the first one, please, which is the CIF fund and dashboard?
Yeah, morning, Chair. Yeah, there's no specific update on the CIF and BLPDF dashboards. In terms of the residential investment fund dashboard, there's 4 projects on there that are working through at the moment. We are seeing encouraging sales on residential sales at the moment, despite the COVID situation, in particular both on Urban Splash Port Loop and on Parks Homes in Dudley. Indeed, the Parks Home scheme was 10 units. 6 units had been sold, all at or above professional valuation, and we've now been fully repaid on that scheme. So overall, it is quite encouraging on the residential sales side of things. I think the Chancellor's stamp duty will also have an impact, but that's a bit too early to tell at this point in time. So I'm happy to take any questions on any of the dashboards.
So the 3 dashboards are the collective investment fund, the revolving investment or residential investment fund, and the Brownfield Land Property Development Fund. Any questions or comments to Nick? I can't. Oh, sorry, Nick Abel. Nick, over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Bob. It's just a general comment, and this comes out of having seen of late the number of oven-ready schemes that there are in the whole of our geography that clearly need investment. And it was really a comment based on. Can we see that there are across all of our sort of different dashboards, there are clearly a number of schemes where an agreement to fund was made a long time ago and nothing's happened. And I just wonder whether we ought to be reviewing, identifying and reviewing those schemes with a view to actually pulling money from one and giving it to another one where that might be appropriate. I just wonder whether that's something we ought to be perhaps identifying as part of our agenda when we do review these dashboards going forward, because I've been quite taken over the last couple of weeks by the amount of really good, important schemes right across our combined authority geography that really do need some funding. So that was just a comment, really, and whether we might be able to take that forward.
Yeah, I think that we've discussed that before, to be fair, Nick. So I don't think it's a question for Nick Oakley at this stage, but it's noted and we can have a conversation some future date. There are processes in place to do some of those things, and we did last time within the board in the private session. So any questions for Nick on the three dashboards at this point in time? Carl, anyone indicated?
Not that I can see, Chair.
Okay, then just for noting, thanks, Nick. The last one is the Land and Property Investment Fund. Is Sarah on the line to be able to present that?
Good morning, Bob. Yes, I'm on the line. Morning, everybody. So again, this is a dashboard for noting. You'll see that I think that the situation is fairly consistent with the last time I reported on it. That's mainly because the 53 million is fully committed at this stage. The breakdown of the schemes is on the third page of this dashboard and probably reflects the point that Nick has made, actually, that compared to the second page of this dashboard, we've seen considerable changes through the life of this programme, but all funds are committed and happy to take any questions if there are from the board this morning.
Any questions for Sarah? No one indicating. Again, it's just for noting. There are no changes from the fully committed fund that was reported last time. So I'm going to move forward. Okay, thank you. Now, excluding the press and public, I therefore pass the following resolution in accordance with Section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972. In that the press and public be excluded from the meeting due to the consideration of the following items of business as they involve the likely disclosure exempt information related to the business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. That's the resolution.